Here. We're here again with another edition of Bowen on the Birds through the A2D radio network. And today I have a tremendous guest, I think, Jimmy Kempski, who covers the Eagles for PhillyVoice. Jimmy has an interesting background that he came into this. He's a very unconventional sports reporter, I think probably because of that background. And we want to talk about that. We want to talk about the Eagles. We want to talk about Jimmy's dumpster fire series this week, where he goes around the NFC East and points out all the bad things about each team, including the Eagles, and a few other things we want to get to today. So, that's our show. It's if you can see us through the haze of the Canadian wildfires, we'll be here until 4:00. And Jimmy, come on aboard.
Hello, Les. Good to see you.
Good to see you. How the wildfires holding up in your area?
I didn't even know they were there. I was writing this morning, and I went outside, and before I even saw it, I smelled it, and I was like, "What? Yeah. Really? It's back? Come on!" So
yeah, we can do. It's overstayed its welcome, certainly,
for sure.
Today, you had an interesting thing on PhillyVoice, basically a children's book about the San Francisco 49ers and their reaction to their loss in the NFC Championship game and the lack of a healthy quarterback. I thought it was hilarious. What kind of feedback have you gotten?
Well, it's been unanimously positive from Eagles fans. I think they rather enjoyed that. And I think they've kind of gotten sick of hearing the 49ers blame their loss on some kind of and it was unlucky for them that they lost their quarterback, but also they couldn't protect their quarterback, either of them.
And that's why they lost them.
They got their asses kicked. Let's be honest. What happened in that game?
It wasn't that a meteor fell on their quarterback.
Right. Yeah, he got hit. Yeah, he got sacked. Basically, it was a strip sack. Not called that way on the field, but Linval Joseph had the wherewithal to jump on that ball. And they got the clear recovery, whatever. But yeah, it's been sort of from the top down with the 49ers organization, with the GM John Lynch and the head coach Kyle Shanahan, making reference to not kind of feeling like they had an unfair fight in that game, and then more sort of inflammatory things being said really all off season by guys like Deebo Samuel. Jimmy Ward, not on the team anymore, but Jimmy Ward complained about it for a while. Christian McCaffrey had said things, even the kicker, Robbie Gould, Brandon Ayuk. So a lot of their best players just kind of wouldn't let it go that they just got beat in that game. And they just kind of kept it up, which is kind of in contrast to the way the Eagles handle themselves after the Super Bowl was over. Like James a lot of people didn't like the holding call on him at the end of the game. James Bradbury stood there and he said, "I held him." Would I have liked to them have not called that? Yeah, but I held him. And then Jason Kelsey and a lot of other guys were up there saying, in the slippery field, of course.
Yeah.
Both teams had mentioned how bad the field conditions were that day, but from the Eagles side of things, while they did mention that the field was bad, they are also very clear to point out Kansas City played on the same field, so it affected them as well. And hats off to them for winning the Super Bowl.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I mentioned to you before we went on the air here, I'm puzzling over why the reactions were so different. And the only thing I can come up with is the Eagles lost the Super Bowl by 3 points, and everyone agreed that they played pretty well except for the defense in the second half. And most of the blame for that went to Jonathan Gannon. The 49ers, in contrast, got blown out of that NFC game.
Yeah.
And if they were saying, if all they were saying was we wouldn't have gotten blown out if this stuff hadn't happened, I can agree with that. That's probably true. But to take it as something that you were cheated out of, or that something nefarious happened, or that you would have necessarily won if these injuries hadn't occurred, is absurd. And I think it has to do with maybe trying to come up with an explanation for getting blown out.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think another factor too is probably just the leadership of those teams too. Like I think some of the veteran leaders of the Eagles, the players would have said, "Yo, shut up." If, like after a while, if some of the younger players were just continued on with it. And then of course the coaching at some point, at the 49ers coaching staff or front office or whatever, I told players, "Yo, guys, stop." Then at some point they would have stopped. They wouldn't have continued on with this until June or July. Whereas that, I think the head coach and the GM, like I said before, I think they feel cheated too and are, in no hurry to tell their players to stop complaining about it.
All very true. Well, I did want to get into here. You come at things from a very different perspective than I did as a sports writer. Your background is very different. And I like what you do, and I respect it very much. But it's a totally different context, I guess, than what I grew up in and how I approached the job. So tell our viewers, how did you get into this? You worked on this is the second week in a row that I've had a Wolf of Wall Street on my podcast. I had Brandon Brooks from Goldman Sachs last week. So tell us about how you got into this and why in the world you would enter this dying profession.
Yeah, the Wall Street part of it was, I wouldn't necessarily call myself, a Wolf of Wall Street the way that you put it. I sold investment research to, hedge funds, to, like big banks or whatever. But that was just one of really more than anything. I was a salesman. So I worked for Xerox. I sold medical malpractice insurance. I was in like pharmaceutical sales. So I had like a pretty wide variety of sales jobs in the 10 years that I was in sales. And I kind of hated it. Like the money was fine. And, the hours were, of course, certainly different. I think I probably worked more now than I did in my sales career, but I didn't work at all on Saturday and Sunday. I went in on Monday morning and I left, and I came home at night, and I did that for 5 days. And then I did whatever I wanted over the weekend. Whereas this job, you kind of never really turn off. Right. So it's just different in that regard, but I never really, particularly liked what I was doing. I was never particularly passionate about whatever it was I was selling, whether it be investment research or copiers or, whatever it may be. I just didn't care all that much about copiers or whatever. So, I kind of knew that I could, write a little bit. I knew about football. I figured I could maybe, marry those two things. I had actually gotten laid off from a job that I didn't particularly like anyway, near the end of my sales career. And I realized, what, if I'm going to, I don't think failure is the way to properly put this, but if I'm going to fail, in my career in some way, I'd rather fail in trying to do something I actually want to do than this. Right. So I really just kind of put my full energy into trying to get, a writing job covering the Eagles, or really I was open to covering any team really. In fact, I covered Tim Tebow specifically for 1 week a long time ago. But yeah, that's kind of how I got into it. Was I just ultimately wanted to try to do something that I actually wanted to do. Never took a journalism class in my life. I went to school for communications at Rowan, especially in radio, TV, film. So that's sort of adjacent to what we do, but never actually took a single journalism class in my life. Kind of for me, a lot of the sort of etiquette, if you will, in terms of journalism is really all just more common sense than anything else.
I agree with that. Yeah.
So, but yeah, that's kind of been my journey. And this year will now be my 11th covering the Eagles full-time year-round.
That is amazing. And I'm glad you've been able to make a go of it. And, the fans are richer for that. You have 100,000 Twitter followers? I'm envious.
I think I just went over a few weeks ago. Yeah, 100,000. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. So you mentioned that you did TV film at Rowan. That is indicated in what you do. You integrate a lot of things visually that people like me don't know how to do. And it's very entertaining. And
Thank you. Appreciate that.
one of my sons in particular is always showing me stuff that you've done that I see anyway, but
Yeah.
I think my point is he's young and this really appeals. Unfortunately, the way that I like to do things, longer writing pieces, I think the business is moving away from that. And fortunately or unfortunately, I should say, it would be unfortunate for me if I were young, but I'm retired, so.
I think there's room for all of it, really.
Yeah.
It's all valuable.
I think it strikes
to the
a chord,
readers,
though, with the current millennial generation who aren't as maybe literary in some ways as previous generations were.
Yeah, I think there's maybe something to folks having a shorter attention span, which I think, the sort of some of the things that I do kind of lines up nicely with that, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I'll do some longer stuff, but typically when I do, I'll have like a lot of video mixed in or the drawings or whatever. So I kind of try to keep a lot of my work visual. As opposed to just a long running prose, which frankly I would do more of that if like I were better at it. I would probably do more articles, but it's just not a strength of mine, and the strength that that I do have is just kind of what I do.
Part of that was the in the Dumpster Fire series, which we're going to discuss more in depth in a few minutes. In the Cowboys thing, you had that beautiful array of videos of all the different playoff endings from recent years, some of which I'd forgotten about, frankly. But it was just so, you just don't see stuff like that laid out in that concise a manner anywhere. It was very effective, I thought.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, that was fun to write. They're actually horrible, those things to write, because they're a lot of they take a long time, and it's a lot of pressure because
you do a lot of research, I noticed.
Oh, for sure, because they got to be on point. So if I know that I am, actively making fans of those teams angry, and I know that they're going to fire back, so I'm kind of putting that on myself that people are going to be very mean back to me. But if they're going to, I want to make sure they don't have very good arguments like in return. So I can't have any obvious mistakes in there factually, of course. And then the points that I do make kind of have to be on point. And if it's boring and it's not funny, then, they're just going to diminish me as a writer or whatever. So I really work hard on those to kind of not give them.
Yeah. All righty. Jimmy seems to have frozen up here on our screen. So we'll get him back, and we're going to go to commercial here. And hopefully on the other side of the commercial, we'll have a live and moving Jimmy.
Hey Birds fans, the NFL schedule has arrived and Philly Sports Trips has all the details now. Visit the site phillysportstrips.com. This is sure to be an epic season. Be sure to go there now to make sure that you don't get shut out. Join us in Tampa, LA, Seattle, or when we get revenge in Kansas City. Don't want to fly? No problem. Gather up your crew and hop aboard one of our signature boisterous bus trips to DC or New York. Sign up now and make sure to mention A2D. Don't miss out on the best Philly fan experience anywhere. Philly Sports Trip customers always stay at the best hotels and meet NFL legends. Book today.
We're back. Jimmy, are you there? Oh, it doesn't look good. I assume our producer is trying to get Jimmy back online here for us. But in the meantime, today's show, obviously, we're talking to Jimmy. We have a lot of other subjects to talk to him about other than his Dumpster Fire series, which is very entertaining. I want to get his thoughts on Devon Allen, the hurdler who has been trying to make the Eagles since last summer. Devon's been doing a lot of hurdling this spring. I remember when he went to the Penn Relays, he was talking about how he was in football shape now and he wasn't really in hurdling shape. And I thought, okay, that's if he wants to go out and hurdle, while attending to what he needs to do to get ready for football, that, nothing wrong with that. But he's kept on with it. And this last time he had a time, I guess, that was about fourth best in the world this year. And the quotes after that were a little bit concerning. He was talking about the world championships and how the Eagles would be in camp. and he would have to decide what he was going to do. He's a practice squad player who hasn't made a roster yet. He needs a lot of work with the Eagles to make this happen. And, I don't want to be, I love the idea of somebody doing two different things. The whole Deion Sanders, Bo Jackson era I thought was fascinating. But, you're Devon Allen. You're not Deion Sanders. You're not Bo Jackson. If you're going to play football, it might be time to play football. And I don't know what's going to happen with that, but I wonder what the Eagles really think when they're at NovaCare and, talking this over behind closed doors. Do they really want to mess with this guy a lot longer if he's going to keep juggling the two sports, and if he can't really make an impact, I guess, as an NFL receiver? Our agree or disagree question this week was brought up by Brandon Brooks in our last podcast. I was talking to Brandon about, the Eagles have this issue and they have that issue, and teams that go to the Super Bowl the next year often doesn't turn out to be as good. And Brandon said, hey, long as Jalen Hurts is out there, they're going to be all right. And that got me thinking, is that really true? I kind of think he has a point. To not necessarily that they'll get back to the Super Bowl if everything else goes wrong and Hurts is still good. But are they a good team on the back of Jalen Hurts, irrespective of everything else? And I kind of agree. And I hope to get Jimmy's thoughts on that. And we're trying to get Jimmy back in here, and he's texting me. So if you'll allow me a moment here, I want to ask him to refresh his link. I have had this problem as a guest on other podcasts before, and I know it's maddening to the people that you're trying to get on with because they ask you questions and your answer freezes up, and it doesn't make for a great podcast, frankly. But we are hoping we're going to get Jimmy back. He very much wanted to do this today, which I was very grateful for. Another thing I want to talk about today when we do get Jimmy back around is the rookies. And good teams don't always get a lot out of rookies because they're good teams and there aren't a lot of starting jobs and there isn't a lot of playing time available to rookies, even if the rookies are good. But there are, I think from a fan perspective, a lot of fans are expecting some things this year out of guys like Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith. And we'll have to see on that. I'm real interested. Tyler Steen might win that right guard job. Will that be a good thing if they end up relying on rookies? The story with rookies, a lot of times, even if they play well to start the season, it's a much longer season in college. You hit a wall late in the season, you drop off, you get hurt. There are a lot of problems with it. I see Jimmy. I can see Jimmy scratching his neck. There he is. He's back.
Yeah, I'm going handheld now. Internet went out completely.
This always happens to me. I go on that podcast with John McMullen and Jody McDonald. Have you ever done that?
Sure.
And I think they've stopped asking me on because I'm always getting dropped. I don't know what the deal is, but let's hope we've got you back for good here. We were talking about the dumpster fire series.
Yep. And
how you do it. The research is incredible, I think. I have some stuff here, like the 27 quarterbacks that the Washington team has. I've forgotten that some of those guys ever played. Rex Grossman. I don't remember Rex Grossman.
Right.
John Beck. There's a name from very long ago. but you have to do, I mean, some of the stuff, I see you credit Next Gen Stats or something, but a lot of it, you're just looking through data, right? And laboriously sifting through stuff. Is that
for sure? Yeah, that one in particular I had written about before. So that one was just a copy and paste from something I had written, a year ago, 2 years ago, or whatever. But yeah, I mean, at some point I did go through and figure out all the guys that have started a game, and that's not that hard. You can just kind of go to like StatHead, and you can say, number of starts, Commanders this year to this year, and I'll give you.
There goes Jimmy again. There you are.
Sorry. Yeah, no, it's good. My phone was ringing, and it cut out the video there. All kinds of issues here.
That's all right.
But yeah, a lot of the research also is just kind of also knowing where to get it too. So I mean, no doubt that my phone rang again.
You're a popular guy.
Same number. But yeah, a lot of the dumpster fire series for sure is very. Somebody really wants to call that's the same number 3 times in a row. They're very research intensive, no doubt.
So I wanted the Washington. Let's start with Washington, because we talked about the 27 quarterbacks. You had a really good point about Ron Rivera. I really liked Ron. I knew him a little bit when he was with the Eagles.
Yep.
I've been around him some since then. He got to the Super Bowl with the Panthers, and I was impressed with the way he handled himself through all that. I think he's a down-to-earth guy. He's not real impressed with himself. He seems, good values, decent person. But I've been so unimpressed with what he's done in Washington. And you hit the nail on the head with several things. One was the press conference where he didn't realize that they could be eliminated from the playoffs that day. And that's just, you can't be an NFL head coach and be in that position. Another thing is, the fact that he's basically a lame duck. I mean, they've got a new owner, we assume. That hasn't been quite signed off on yet, but we assume they have a new owner. And he's a coach who hasn't won there. He's been there a while now. They aren't going to be real good this year. They might be sort of okay if everything goes great, but there's just no way that he's going to have a long-term future there. And he's got the thing to do, as you said, is to go with Sam Howell, but will he do that in his position, needing to win games to prove himself to new ownership?
Yeah, I think off the top of my head, he's 22, 27, and 1 in his 3 years there. And he actually won a division. They won in 2020.
At 7-9.
With a 7-9 record. They almost beat the Buccaneers, who won the Super Bowl that year. And I don't want to say they almost beat them, but they gave them a game.
They played a competitive game.
Yeah. So, you're right that he's you wonder what kind of short-term decisions he might make, given that he may feel like, well, if I don't make the playoffs, I'm going to lose my job. And he probably would have lost his job this offseason if new ownership if like the sale of the team had already happened, or like it happened in February, March, or whatever. But there's no way in hell that Dan Snyder was going to fire him and pay out the rest of his contract before he sold the team. It just wasn't going to happen. So he just pretty much remained the coach on a matter of circumstances. And he's a very well-respected guy. He beat cancer. A lot of people, really respect and like him. His players seem to like him. But man, the results just aren't there. And the visual of him doing his press conference, and they said, well, if you're eliminated at the end of the day here, and he was like, whoa, we can be eliminated. He actually said, we can be eliminated. we can be eliminated. And they're like, yeah, if the Packers win tonight, your season is, you're eliminated from the playoffs. And he's just kind of like, oh, how do you not know that?
That's also a failure of your media relations communication staff. He needs to go into that press conference briefed on things. Oh, by the way, right, Coach, that if you've got to, ultimately it's on him, but a good PR staff the coach isn't sitting there flat-footed when anything comes up. That's their job, is to make sure he knows. That's why they have these delays after games before these guys come up and talk. Sometimes they're long delays.
Yeah.
As we remember from the Doug Peterson days, where I don't know what the hell he was doing. I don't know if he was taking a nap or what.
Yeah,
but, it would take like 45 minutes to get Doug in there, and a lot of it was going over stuff, I guess. It was Ron's fault, but it was really just an organization that.
Yeah, I think it's an indictment of the whole organization, because you look at the Eagles, for example. At some point during the week, some Eagles analytics nerd is going to come up to Sirianni. He's going to give him all the playoff scenarios. So it's not even going to come to a scenario or a situation where Sirianni has to figure out, are we eliminated, blah 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 blah. Somebody's going to come up and tell him whether he wants to or not, and he's just going to know part of the end. And any head coach should really be interested in that anyway, because you get into a game. You get into the end of a game and you start are we going to go to overtime? If we're in overtime, what does a tie do for us versus a win? You kind of have to know that stuff so you can strategize appropriately within the game.
It affects your coaching. Absolutely. That's an excellent point. Washington, I would say they're likely to finish last in this division. It's a pretty good division. They might not be a horrible team, but the ownership change isn't going to, as you pointed out, Josh Harris isn't a panacea. It's not, he's going to come in there and, he's not a Jeffrey Lurie. He's not going to build, a practice facility and change the whole culture of the place and, pump money into it. He's kind of known for not doing that.
Right.
And he's spread pretty thin with 3 franchises that he's kind of the majority owner of. And it'll be interesting to see, but he can't be worse than Snyder. I mean, that's a baseline that you just can't, there's no way to go below that, but I'm not sure how far above it. There's going to be a honeymoon period, but I don't know how, when the dust settles, I don't know that they're in a much better place. Maybe they will be, maybe they won't be.
Couldn't possibly find a lower bar in terms of placing one owner with another.
Absolutely. Well, we have another break coming up, but on the other side of it, I want to talk to you about the other 2 installments you've done on the Dumpster series, both of which I thought were really interesting and both of which I agreed with completely, which, I don't always agree with everything. I'm an agreeable person, but, I have my own opinions on stuff. But let's go to that commercial now and hope the internet lets us keep Jimmy around for a while.
It's actually back up, so I'm going to hop back onto my computer because my arm's getting tired here.
Okay. Sounds like a plan.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Hey, Birds fans, the NFL schedule has arrived and Philly Sports Trips has all the details now. Visit the site PhillySportsTrips.com. This is sure to be an epic season. Be sure to go there now to make sure that you don't get shut out. Join us in Tampa, LA, Seattle, or when we get revenge in Kansas City. Don't want to fly? No problem. Gather up your crew and hop aboard one of our signature boisterous bus trips to DC or New York. Sign up now and make sure to mention A2D. Don't miss out on the best Philly fan experience anywhere. Philly Sports Trip customers always stay at the best hotels and meet NFL legends. Book today.
And we're back, and Jimmy's back. He's on the computer and everything. It's just wonderful. We're glad to have him. Before we went to commercial, we were talking about low bars.
Yes.
Clear in relation to the Washington ownership situation. So I think that segues nicely into the Giants. And, the fact that the guys who are in charge there now are smarter than the guys they had in charge there a few years ago, the general manager and the coach. But how much smarter and how far does that get you? Talent-wise, you were a terrible team. You had a really good season for what you had, I thought, which is what you pointed out in your installment on Philly Voice. But the roster still isn't anything wonderful. And you pointed out their negative point differential in their winning season last year. And the fact that they've pissed off Saquon Barkley.
Yeah.
And, and Daniel Jones. I'm one of those guys that I kind of like Daniel Jones. I think he's okay, but you had a graphic about can you win the Super Bowl? Yes. No. Do you give a guy $40 million? That's exactly right. I would not give Daniel Jones $40 million a year. I think he's one of those guys he's a workable quarterback. He's not terrible, but no. And reversion to the mean in terms of interceptions is very likely, as you pointed out. The Giants, it seems to me the media there, you probably pay attention to that a little bit, is really setting the fans up for disappointment. I think there's a feeling, there's a vibe in Giants land that they're just going to shoot for, the trajectory is going to continue and they're going to be a really good team this year. And I don't see it.
I think there's two different factions of the Giants media, where there's the guys that have been there for a while that saw the 2 Super Bowl teams, and they tend to be a little more forgiving is the kind way I'll put it, is of the franchise and what they do and the decisions they make. And then there's sort of the guys that have come aboard, since then, like your Jordan Renans of the world, Zach Rosenblatt before he went to the Jets beat, Dan Duggan for The Athletic, Pat Leonard is another one. I think they cover the team very, very very well. I think they cover objectively and well, and they criticize when warranted. But yeah, certainly I think this fan base kind of has some beer muscles for the first time in a while, because they made the playoffs, they won a playoff game, and the 5 years prior to that, they had the literal worst record in the NFL. Tied with the Jets over that 5-year combined span of time. You mentioned the low bar with the Commanders, and you mentioned the low bar with the Giants. You can replace Dave Gettleman with anyone, and it's going to be an upgrade. I have not been a huge fan of what Joe Shane has done there in his first year or year plus or whatever it's been since he's there. I have been impressed with what Brian Daboll has done there. Certainly he's been a big time upgrade over Joe Judge. And as far as Daniel Jones goes, you mentioned the 5 interceptions, and there's a reason for the 5 interceptions. They didn't throw the ball on the field. So they were last in the NFL in pass plays of over 20 plus yards. He was also last in things like average air yards to the sticks, which means he on average, he threw passes that were like almost 3 yards, short of the sticks. He also had like the lowest, average intended air yards in the NFL. So basically, it was just dinking and dunking all day, which makes sense because they had, a lot of
weapons.
They had, and the weapons they did have, they had a lot of receivers get hurt last year too. So there were kind of guys like in and out of the lineup. When your best receiver, at one point in the season is a guy named Isaiah Hodgins, you're probably not going to be, a team that makes a lot of plays down the field. So that's not the kind of offense that Brian Daboll wants to have. And you saw that in Buffalo. They had Josh Allen, who was pushing the ball down the field, in addition to, being able to make plays with his legs. Daniel Jones can make plays with his legs. We don't know if he's gotten better yet at pushing the ball down the field, because when he tried to do that his first 3 years in the league, he turned it over like crazy. So what they did was they went out and they signed a bunch of guys that can run. First of all, they brought Darius Slayton back. He was like the one guy that made any kind of plays down the field at all. They signed Paris Campbell, a speed guy. They traded for Darren Waller, who for a tight end is a down the field threat. They drafted Jalen Hyatt out of Tennessee, widely considered one of the fastest wide receivers, in college football last year. There's a guy I'm missing here too. It was escaping me, but the plan basically is to bring in faster guys that can get down the field and make plays. So it'll be very interesting to see that can go one of two ways. They start making plays down the field and their offense is more dangerous, or can it backfire by, with Daniel Jones now trying to push the ball down the field? Is he now putting the ball in harm's way, and it results in a lot more, first of all, not even turnovers in terms of interceptions, but also now you're taking maybe deeper drops. You're asking your offensive line to pass protect a little bit longer. Maybe that results in, more strip sacks and that kind of thing. So it'll be really interesting to see how he is. I think a good way to look at it is the way the Eagles tried to give Jalen Hurts weapons that did things that he did not do well in 2021. So in 2021, if you'll recall, all he did was throw to the right side of the field. He didn't throw much over the middle. He didn't throw to the left. But especially down the middle, he was very cautious about putting the ball in the middle of the field, because if he missed, you're putting the ball in harm's way. So what do? They sign A.J. Brown, a guy who just makes his living over the middle of the field. And I think that was a good sort of litmus test on, is this our guy long-term? Can he make plays with this great receiver over the middle of the field? And he showed that he did, and they paid him. So I think this is kind of a weird, certainly the Giants aren't looking at the Eagles and saying, well, we're going to do the same thing. They paid Daniel Jones before they had that answer. So now they have him on a 4-year deal worth $160 million, which really, I think it's more like more realistically, it's a 2-year deal worth, around like 85 or something like that. And then they can get out of it at that point. But I think they don't know how this season's going to go with him pushing the ball down the field, but it can go one of two ways.
Absolutely. I agree. And I'm a little pessimistic. I think they overachieved last year. And they've made some improvements, but the improvements weren't really revelatory to me. Maybe I'm wrong, but I just don't see them being a great team this year. Which brings us to Dallas.
Yep.
If I were a typical Eagles fan, I would be so glad that I would want Jerry Jones to live forever, because Dallas by rights should be the New York Yankees. They have the best facilities.
Yeah.
They have the biggest fan base nationally, although that's a bit of a, I don't think those people should be proud of themselves, who are Dallas fans in Minnesota. But, it's more revenue than anyone else. They should win Super Bowls regularly, but they don't, because their owner is Jerry Jones. And someone explained this to me years ago when they were going through their all those coaches that you just weren't impressed by. It's like the really good coaches don't want to go into that situation.
Yeah.
They don't want to be, it's the only team in the league where the owner gives his press conference after the game, after the coach, and just blithely says, I thought we should have thrown the ball on that 3rd and 4. I'm not really sure what the deal was there. No coach wants to go through that. Jeffrey Lurie doesn't do that. You can't find Jeffrey Lurie after an Eagles game. He's down there, but he's not in front of the media. And if you find him, he's not going to tell you anything. He's not going to say, boy, I thought Nick should have really called that second half a lot differently. I was really disappointed in our boys today. No, you don't do that. And, that's the key to me. I mean, they can improve their team all they want. Dak Prescott, he's had some problems with interceptions these last few years, but I think he's a pretty good quarterback. Great guy, tremendous, icon for the franchise, face of the franchise. But as long as Jerry's hiring Mike McCarthy's and Jason Garrett's, it's never going to change. It's just not going to change.
Yeah. Infamously, he parted ways with Jimmy Johnson because they're two alpha dog mentalities and they couldn't coexist. That they haven't been back to the NFC Championship game in almost 25 years. So, it's and you mentioned Dak Prescott. I think he's a good topic of conversation here. When I did the Commanders dumpster fire piece, I had noted that this year will be the 7th consecutive year where they have a new week 1 quarterback, a different week 1 quarterback. 7 in 7 years, week 1 starting quarterback.
Commanders, yes.
I went through and I was just curious to see, how many other teams around the league were even close to that. So I had a graph showing, all the teams that had 6 quarterbacks, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 in the last 7 years during the same span. The only one that had 1, the only team that's the same starting quarterback every year, the Cowboys, Dak Prescott. So they have the quarterback stability there. And you're right. I think he's a good player, and he's certainly a good, you want an NFL Walter Payton Man of the Year. this year. So he's a good guy. He's not the same quarterback that he was his first few years in the league.
Right.
He suffered that leg injury, and he came back. He barely ran at all his first year back in 2021, and then last year he averaged, I think it was like 15 point something rushing yards per game, which puts him in the 20s in the NFL quarterback landscape. So he's a guy that had that sort of dual threat ability, and he actually probably still has it in his body. He can do it, but he just doesn't do it anymore. He doesn't run anymore. It's just not part of the game that he wants to have on the field anymore. So, I think he's kind of regressed in terms of his, ability to be dangerous in a lot of different ways. He's gotten smarter as a quarterback on pre-snap adjustments and reads and going through progressions and that kind of stuff. But he also led the league in interceptions last year, despite missing 5 games. So he's got a big season coming up.
Notable, yes.
To prove,
I would say that their offensive line isn't anywhere near as good as it was 3 or 4 years ago when he was really playing much better. And I would say his weapons aren't maybe what they were when Ezekiel Elliott was running over people and Des Bryant was, almost.
They traded Amari Cooper for a bag of peanuts. And Tyron Smith is sort of exhibit A on that offensive line.
He's always hurt. Yeah.
He's basically Jason Peters at this point. He's going to miss some time heading into the season. They lost, they got rid of Lyle Collins. The center had that rare disease. Travis Frederick, I forget what disease it. I don't know how to pronounce it. I can see it on print in my head, but I can't pronounce it. So his career basically ended. So they've kind of had to rebuild their offensive line, and it's not the same. And they have no depth there too, by the way. That's like a ticking time bomb for that team in 2023. It'll be interesting to see how they can weather the storm they're starting right tackle, a guy named Terrence Steele, who took over for Lyle Collins, actually played pretty well last year. He tore an ACL, actually tore 3 different ligaments in his leg against the Texans late in the season. That guy's not going to be ready for week 1 of the season. So,
and he's not going to be really himself until very late in the season.
His lateral agility is going to be very compromised whenever he is ready to play. Yeah. So that's a big concern for them too.
That's absolutely right. And, I just marvel year after year, not so much right now, but a few years ago, the talent they had there and the inability to do anything meangle with it. Yeah. It was just confounding. They drafted for years and years when Howie was kind of struggling, and the Eagles had the chip drafts and all that stuff. The Cowboys were drafting really good players during that time, and they still didn't win anything. It was just incredible. Well, we've got one more. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, you can look at their roster at any point in the last 15 years, and you can pick out 3, 4, sometimes even 5 legitimate star players. And those guys, they have good seasons and they play well. And when you look at a roster heading into the season, you see these star players and you go, oh, that team's really good. But the way they've always been built is that it's a lot of a couple guys at the top, a little mediocrity, and then no depth. And I think that's exactly what this roster looks like heading into the season.
Yeah, you always look at their team, you say, oh, DeMarcus Ware. Oh, Micah Parsons, and then But anyway, we've got one more commercial break.
Okay.
And we'll go right back with Jimmy, and we'll finish up with some topics, some non-dumpster related topics as we close out our show.
Hey Birds fans, the NFL schedule has arrived and Philly Sports Trips has all the details now. Visit the site PhillySportsTrips.com. This is sure to be an epic season. Be sure to go there now to make sure that you don't get shut out. Join us in Tampa, LA, Seattle, or when we get revenge in Kansas City. Don't want to fly? No problem. Gather up your crew and hop aboard one of our signature boisterous bus trips to DC or New York. Sign up now and make sure to mention A2D. Don't miss out on the best Philly fan experience anywhere. Philly Sports Trip customers always stay at the best hotels and meet NFL legends. Book today.
And we're back for our last segment. Jimmy, I wanted to get away from the dumpster for a few minutes and talk to you about our agree or disagree today, which was brought up by Brandon Brooks when he was on our last show. I was kind of going through, I guess I was anticipating your Eagles dumpster fire piece, which hasn't come out yet. But I was kind of going through some of my concerns about the Eagles. And Brandon's basic stance was, as long as Jalen Hurts is okay, everything's pretty good. And I got to thinking about that. And it's sort of true. I mean, you can take it to an extreme. If every offensive lineman goes down and A.J. Brown, gets hurt. And I mean, but by and large, even if there are some bumps in the road, if the schedule's tougher, if a couple guys get hurt, Jalen Hurts is a trump card. I mean, he really is. They're not going to be a bad team.
Agree. Yeah, he's right. Like they have a great roster. I think it's the best roster in not just the NFC, not just the NFC East, not just the NFC, entire league. I think it's the best roster. So if you lose a couple guys here and there, it's still going to be a very good team. And they also have pretty good depth, in my opinion, at most positions. You have some shaky areas, of course, linebackers, top of the list. I think wide receivers on the outside anyway, is sort of a sneaky, underrated depth concern area. But by and large, it's a very good roster. And as long as that quarterback stays healthy, they're going to be totally fine. Yeah.
Wide receivers and depth. That brings up the guy I've been kind of following a little bit here lately because I'm a little bit puzzled, Devon Allen.
Okay.
So he went to the Penn Relays. I mentioned this while we were having our internet problems there earlier, and you probably didn't hear me. He went to the Penn Relays and he ran, and that was a few months ago. And he said, I'm in football shape. I'm not really in hurdling shape anymore. And I thought, okay, that's fine. If he wants to go run a hurdles race while, maintaining his weight and everything for football, okay. But now he's continuing to run, and he had a good meet, I guess, over the weekend. His time was the fourth best, or tied for fourth best in the world this year. And the quotes were like, well, the world championships, I'll be in camp with the Eagles. I guess I'll have to make a decision then. And
that's interesting.
Dude, you're a practice squad wide receiver. You're either trying to make it as a football player or you're going to be an Olympic hurdler. And I don't, maybe he didn't make much of a splash last training camp to me. So maybe the best decision for him would be to just stick with the hurdling. But he kind of needs, if he's going to do that, he needs to do that. I don't see him going through another camp as a part-time participant or something and, winning a spot on this roster and helping the Eagles win games and establishing himself as an NFL wide receiver. I just don't see how that happens with this juggling act. As I said before, he's not Deion Sanders.
Yeah, he's not Bo Jackson. Yeah.
What is your take on this?
Yeah, I feel like football is a sport that, if you're not totally committed to it, it's, you're going to have a tough time surviving. A lot of the talk around the draft these days isn't so much about, can this guy play? That's probably like the easy part of the scouting world. The harder part is trying to figure out if these guys love football. And that's where they failed. And, some cases in the past, like Danny Watkins did not love football.
Absolutely.
Had ability, did not love football, and he flamed out very quickly. So, do you love track? And if that's fine, go be one of the best in the world at that. But if you're not fully committed to football and you're not the level of player that, as you mentioned, Bo Jackson, Deion Sanders, guys like that were, then you're putting yourself in a position where you're probably not going to make the team.
Absolutely.
He did have I will say for him, he did have the highlight of the preseason last year against the Browns. He had that long touchdown catch and actually looked okay in like the on special teams as a gunner. I thought I actually thought, I didn't have him on my final 53, but it made me stop and think maybe could they keep this guy? And then ultimately they didn't. And he did survive on the practice squad the entirety of the season. But yeah, I think you're right that you kind of have to be fully committed or at his as a football player at his level, or you're probably not going to survive.
Agreed. Now, tangentially, you brought up something there that I wanted to get to, special teams.
Mm-hmm.
Why does Michael Clay still have a job?
Yeah.
The personnel, they had problems all year, and it was sneaky because the problems weren't necessarily reflected in the major stats, but it was like one horrible thing would happen each week. It shouldn't ever happen under any circumstance. And I remember the first game, I was still still going in the locker room, and the first game where they had a fake punt run against them. And I remember talking to players, like it was a situation where you might expect a fake punt. And no, they weren't expecting a fake punt. They were, the explanation was they were trying to get lined up and some guys weren't lined up right. Well, what the hell is that? That's not the players. That's coaching. And the other aspect of this is they finally, toward the end of the season, made a roster move for special teams with Christian Ellis, and it made a huge difference for a while. Now, maybe it's not Clay's fault. Maybe they wouldn't let him, bring up Devon Allen to be a gunner, or maybe they wouldn't let him, experiment with different guys off the practice squad. But if you have a Super Bowl roster and bad special teams, I don't see how that happens, frankly.
While you're talking there, I had actually sort of documented all the special teams gaffes that they had. This is in the middle of the season. I had done this last year. Week 2, Vikings blocked a field goal. Week 3, Britton Covey had a muff punt. Week 5, Cardinals convert on a fake punt. Week 6, if you remember this, Kevontae Turpin in a long kick return right before the end of the half against the Cowboys. The Cowboys had nothing in the first half of that game, nothing. And then that special teams play sparked them. They made that a game. Eagles ultimately won. But they made that a game. Steelers converted on a fake punt in week 8. Week 10, Reed Blankenship roughing the punter. Week 10, week 10 against both of these against the Commanders. The Eagles, so they completely left the guy unblocked on a punt, and Sipos was able to kind of dodge him and then get a punt off anyway. But just guys came completely free. Week 12, the Packers return man, Keyshawn Nixon, when I had like 3 kick returns of like 50 yards.
Yes.
So at that point in the season, it was after that game that you mentioned where Christian Ellis was brought up from the practice squad, and he did make a difference. But at that point in the season, I remember talking about like, this team is going to lose a game eventually. They hadn't lost the game because of a special teams gaffe to that point. But I remember thinking they were going to lose a game at some point because of special teams. And then it didn't happen during the regular season. And I don't want to say they lost the Super Bowl because of Aaron Sipos's crappy punt in that game, but certainly that was a big play in that game and didn't help.
Yeah.
I mean, there certainly is an argument. The best part about the special teams for the Eagles is Jake Elliott. Like, Jake Elliott is a phenomenal kicker, but that has absolutely zero to do with Michael Clay. Right. So, like, I don't know. Yeah, I kind of agree that, it is a little surprising that he was able to keep his job. Maybe they just felt like, we went to a Super Bowl. We don't want to rock the boat. Maybe that's sort of the logic there. But they had a lot of problems in a lot of different areas. And the only thing that made their special teams respectable was the kicker.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe the only thing I can come up with is maybe they know internally that they didn't give him the resources.
Could be.
They didn't call guys up that they, but a lot of those failures still to me look like coaching failures more than personnel failures. Maybe I'm wrong, but since we're talking about punting, sort of, Eagles fans are great. And one of the things that I love about them is there's probably not another fan base in the league that gets so into stuff like who's going to be the punter.
Yes.
I can't tell you how many times I've been asked on Twitter about the punting competition this year and who's going to win it and what's going to happen. And I guess this will just rivet everyone in training camp, and you guys will be like jotting down, each guy's punt. Were you surprised they didn't do anything more substantial in the offseason there? And what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, last year, I think there were 5 punters that got drafted. It was like one of the strongest punter drafts ever. This year, I think there was only one or two. So I never thought they were going to pick one in the draft. Yeah. Especially because I guess they did have a 7th round pick. But yeah, I fully expected them to at least sign one during the undrafted free agency phase, which they did. They signed Ty Zentner from Kansas State. And we actually
didn't do anything tremendous in the OTAs.
Yeah, in OTAs, they actually had them punting right in front of us. So you're aware, of course, how they have our vantage point, they're vertical, the fields. Well, in OTAs, they're like, we watch lengthwise. They change it up before a training camp for whatever reason. But the punters were basically punting from side to side from our view, right in front of us. So we were all watching intently these punters, and Dom, big Dom DeSandro, he's like, "Are you guys taking punter notes?" But we were, and I was timing them for hang time, and Sipas very, very clearly out punted Ty Zentner. I don't know how you can go into another season with this guy, because in 2021 he was horrendous at the end of the season. At the end of the regular season, then in the playoff game against Tampa, just shankopotamus all over the place. And a lot of those bad punts, the ensuing Buccaneers drives led to touchdowns. And then, obviously he has the terrible punt against the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. I don't know how he's fine early in the season, but I don't know how you can trust his clutch ability in big games at this point. I imagine that if he legitimately beats out this rookie undrafted punter, they're still going to be looking at cuts around the league.
Maybe that's the answer right there. Maybe they're waiting for somebody to get cut. But this organization has never been one to be real patient and, to bear with punters over the years. They change punters a lot. It's not like it's the kicking job, which tends to stick with one guy for a while.
Yeah.
I've been just amazed. Sipas's best play all year was, you mentioned the blocked blocked field goal by the Vikings when he ran down that cornerback from behind.
Oh yes, yep. Saved
Maybe he's in the wrong job. Maybe he should be the gunner and let the gunner punt. I don't know.
That's right. I mean, he's got that Australian rules football background.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's got some athletic ability, but yeah, I can't imagine bringing him back as the punter if I'm the Eagles.
Agreed. One more thing before we let you go. Rookies.
Yep.
I mentioned that good teams don't rely a lot on rookies by and large. And the Eagles are going to be a good team. But they have some rookies that fans are excited about. Among all these guys, who do you think has the best chance to make an impact as a rookie, to be out there on the field and be visible, to have an effect on games?
Yeah, so this is going to be probably an odd answer to some people, but I think Tyler Steen, the offensive lineman, I think he's got a great chance of beating out Cam Jurgens for that starting right guard job. And this is sight unseen. So I have not seen this guy play in an Eagles uniform. We saw him line up at OTAs where there's nothing competitive going on there. We'll get a better look at if he can actually play during training camp. But here's my logic on that. So Cam Jurgens, 2nd round pick a couple years ago, 51st overall.
Yeah.
Tyler Steen, 63rd overall. There's really not that big a difference. They're drafted right in the same neighborhood. Now, they're both not guards by trade in college. So Jurgens, of course, is a center. Steen was a tackle at Vanderbilt and Alabama. So they're competing at a job where they're not totally comfortable. But I think Steen has a better chance of moving from tackle and the kind of body that he has from moving from tackle to guard than Jurgens does from moving to center and right guard. But I also kind of look at this long term too. So eventually Jurgens is going to be your starting center. Whenever Kelsey retires, he's going to slot right in there.
Right.
Steen, theoretically, they're drafting him to be the right guard of the future. He's going to be their future there too, because there's not going to be a competition there whenever Jurgens is the starting center going forward. So if he can win that, I feel like the consensus, the basic thinking with that camp battle is, if all things being equal, it'll be Jurgens. I don't see it that way. All things being equal, I think they give it to Steen because he's going to be your long-term answer there anyway. And then, you kind of have Jurgens as your backup center and your backup, and, your first, and maybe Sewell Pett is your first guy off the bench at guard, whatever it may be. Driscoll's your swing tackle. if and when Jordan Mailata or Lane Johnson go down. I think Steen is the guy that makes the most sense for them to kind of want to win that job. So I kind of feel like he's being dismissed a little bit as a real legitimate contender to start on that offensive line. And then you have other guys, of course, like the big name guys. Jalen Carter is going to have a chance to get snaps this year. Nolan Smith is going to get some snaps this year. I think Sidney Brown is going to, whoever wins those two safety jobs, Reed Blankenship and Terrell Evans and, Sidney Brown, I think they're all going to play no matter what. I think there's going to be some 3 safety sets. So those guys are all going to get playing time, whether they win starting jobs or not. But yeah, I think in terms of a guy that could potentially play like, 900,000 snaps on the season, if he wins a starting job, it'd be Steen for me.
Okay. Well, that's a good point. I understand exactly what you're saying, but I'll take the other side on one detail. If Cam Jurgens is going to take over for Jason Kelsey, that's a huge deal. That's a bigger deal than being the right guard of the future. If Cam Jurgens can play next to Kelsey all year and listen to Kelsey and get tips on double teams and things like that from Kelsey, that has a long-term value to me as well. Maybe greater than moving Tyler Steen in there and getting his feet under him. I don't know, but
and to piggyback off that, just getting experience at guard and knowing that position better and sort of knowing the responsibilities of that position, which can only help when he's the full-time center.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
That's going to be a huge. One of the things I love about this team is the veteran leadership.
Yeah,
and at some point there's going to be a huge transition, and it's probably going to be after this season. When you're not going to have Brandon Graham, you're not going to have Kelsey, maybe not Fletcher Cox, maybe not Slay. It's really hard to say what the leadership is going to be. And they have some guys that they've drafted the last few years that, Nakobe Dean and guys like that who seem to have those qualities, but it's still, that's going to be a big deal when they make that leadership transition, because the leadership is the best I've seen of any Eagles team since I've been around them, really, I would say. I don't know if you agree with me.
And that's an understated point, too, because you kind of saw a little drop off when in certain aspects of the defense when Malcolm Jenkins left. Yes. And it wasn't because Malcolm Jenkins at that point in his career was a phenomenal player anymore. It's because he knew where everyone had to be and everyone respected him. And he was kind of running the defense from the back end there. So yeah, I think that's an underrated aspect of roster building.
All right. Well, Jimmy, we've run over time here. We've taken away most of your afternoon.
Now you're good.
Hope you can recoup and, stay out of those wildfire smoke hazard things. And we want to thank you again for doing this. And we want to thank all of our viewers for sitting through this on A2D Radio. This was Bowen on the Birds.